Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review. Not that long ago now, I reviewed the Moondrop SSR earphones, which are known as the Super Spaceship Reference earphone. They were a very bright leaning earphone, very cheap as well at about $30 US, and I didn't mind them even though they were tuned in such a way that's not my normal preferences. They did it quite well. So I was really keen when I was asked to review the Moondrop Super Spaceship Pulse earphones, the SSP, which are in a similar vein to the SSR, but tuned with a bit more bass emphasis. As a direct competitor to other earphones like the Blonde BL03 and BL01, I was really keen to see how they stacked up and what the new tuning had done to my enjoyment of their sound. So stick around and find out what I heard. The Moondrop SSP retail for just under $40 or just over 50 Australian dollars. Now I think I may have misspoken in the opening and said $30. It's $40 for both the SSP and the SSR. They're the same price. And that puts them roughly in line with the Blonde BL03 as well, which I'll come back to shortly. The SSPs use a single dynamic driver, which is apparently beryllium coated. Now beryllium is what's used in headphones like the Focal Utopia. It's an expensive material, but it's a very good material for any sort of audio driver design because it's very light and very rigid. So in theory, it should help to keep the sound pure, avoid extra distortion, and make it very easy for the driver to be moved and stopped as needed. We'll talk shortly about whether that pays off, but first let's have a look at what's included with the SSPs. They come in this little box you can see over here to my right, and in there you get the earphones themselves, this silver plated cable, and 3 pairs of tips it was. So they're silicone tips, just these grey sort of charcoaly coloured ones, and 3 of them in different sizes. They're fine, they're what I'd expect in this sort of level of product. The cable is okay as well, it's not amazing, but I'd say it's better than the cables that come with the Blonde products at the same price point. What I love about the SSPs is the design of the shell. It's the same shape as the SSR, but the finish on it, this sort of blue, dark blue matte finish, just looks gorgeous. I love the look of them. I love the feel of them as well. The fit's a bit interesting, but it works. So with the design of these, they've got a relatively long nozzle section, and so they kind of angle into my ear and sit in quite deep and quite snug. It's maybe a little bit uncomfortable putting them in, but once they're in, they're fine, and they sit there very well. So all in all, I think the design of these is great. The accessory package is fine for $40 and it probably is a step better than something like the Blondes that I've already mentioned. Beyond that, there's really not much to talk about with these. It all comes down to sound quality. And in that regard, I think the SSPs are a much better tuning overall than the SSR. The SSR was really an earphone dedicated for treble lovers, whereas I think more people will find the SSP quite accessible. It's still got a tilt towards the treble overall, but the extra bass emphasis really helps to bring the signature alive. I've described the overall signature in my notes as being right on the edge of too bright, but it's perfectly managed at that boundary. What I found was that certain tracks I'd start to hear a bit of edginess, but it never got to the point that I was finding it fatiguing or that I was finding it flat out uncomfortable. As a result of that treble being lifted but beautifully managed, the imaging is really impressive for a headphone at this level. It's well focused, it's right there dead center for your vocals and other things in the center of the soundstage, and everything else is quite well spaced around it. The soundstage isn't huge, but it's well layered and well presented. One of the tracks that came on while I was testing the SSP was Wall of Berlin by Prince. What really struck me as I listened to it was the kick bass actually had some punch to it from the SSPs, and that's not something the SSRs were able to do. It still wasn't a solid thump like you actually need from a kick bass, but it was a lot closer to what I think of as natural sound when listening to something like a kick bass. Something that I think the SSP got absolutely right though were the cymbals. The cymbal hits at the beginning of Wall of Berlin were spot on in terms of their tonal and timbral accuracy coming from the SSPs. It was just like I was sitting there and the person hit the cymbal in front of me when listening to these, and I can't necessarily say that for some other earphones in this same sort of budget range. Another track that popped up in my playlist was No Place to Hide by Alison Krauss and Union Station. With that track, the SSPs really excelled once again with the textural and timbral accuracy on things like the banjo, the mandolin and the fiddle. They all had this really nice edge to them, but they never got harsh or nasty. It was a thoroughly enjoyable listen. Once again, the vocals were well focused and the textual information with those vocals was strong as well. I think overall I'd still prefer just a little bit more warmth, particularly in the mid-range a bit to bring the mid-range forward a touch, but I think for those that lean towards a slightly brighter sound signature but don't want that thin and ethereal and bodiless sound, I think the SSPs could be a really good option. And they're an earphone that at only $40 I think it's also worth taking a flyer on if you're not quite sure. Maybe you're trying to work out what your taste is in sound signature. This could be a really good choice where you're not going to go too far wrong. I don't think anyone's going to hate them, and you might potentially love them if you do have a preference for that more articulate, focused treble, but don't want to lose out on all bass entirely. In fact, I was just chatting to somebody on one of the comments recently about the JVCs I reviewed a while back, and they to me were a great driver, tuned really poorly. This to me is an example of a tuning that, whilst it's not my normal preference, it's a beautiful tuning of what seems to be an also very good driver, even if it's not at the level of those JVCs. The fact that I prefer it more, even when it's not my preference tuning, shows that it's a better overall management of the tuning process to arrive at a fairly well balanced version of that tilt towards treble. So let's put the $40 SSPs up against the $40 Blonde BL03. The BL03s are very much a standard for budget earphones. They've got some ergonomic and fit problems, but they're a beautiful earphone to look at and a wonderful sounding earphone. As I've already suggested, I think the accessory package on the SSP is slightly better. I don't really like the shape of the tips on the Blondes. I don't particularly like the cable, it's not bad, but I don't particularly like the cable either. So, recognizing that the accessory set is slightly better for the SSP, let's talk about sound. The BL03s produce a bigger soundstage and a better sense of layering throughout the soundstage compared to the SSP. They're also a bit warmer and a bit richer with slightly better bass and up into the mid-range weight as well. The two things that really stood out to me from the BL03 is their better sense of separation of sounds in terms of having a larger soundstage and more space between each of the instruments, and the fact that they're a slightly smoother and more relaxed listen. That doesn't mean unengaging, it means that because they're not quite as treble focused, it's easier to relax into the tracks rather than focus on fine details. By the end of my listening of both of these earphones, I would still choose the Blonde BL03, even though they're older and there are some things about the SSP that I really love. I just think I'd reach for the Blonde BL03 more often as a more enjoyable and equally high performance listen at that sort of price point. The other recent contender for this very budget earphone crown that I've got here is the Blonde BL01. It's been touted by some as the successor to the BL03 and potentially an upgrade to the BL03, but so far I'm not inclined to agree. What I found with the BL01 was that the tonality between the BL01 and the SSP were actually quite similar, but the BL01 lacks the refinement of the SSP. So of these two, despite there being, I think it's about a $17 difference, despite that, I still think the SSP represents better value, even though it is the more expensive earphone, because the refinement of the sound is stronger and therefore it's a better listen overall. The BL01 comes across as pretty much the same as the SSP, but a bit grainy and a bit harsh in comparison. I also happen to not like the design of the BL01. I don't think it looks particularly good. I don't find the fit or the comfort particularly better than the BL03, and therefore definitely not better than the SSP. So with that in mind, I would say if you're looking for that slight treble lean, you want something a bit brighter than the BL03, the SSP is a fantastic option. If you're looking for overall which is the best sounding $40 earphone, I still think I'd give the nod to the BL03. So if you're a fan of treble tilted earphone signatures, or you're trying to work out which signature is your preference, I do believe the SSP is worth trying. I think it's a great earphone for the price, it's beautifully tuned, it's got a wonderful design, a look and feel, so I think it's worth giving a go to. However, if you do already know that you like a slightly warmer sound, maybe a more neutral sound, and when I say neutral, I'm including that bass warmth that is a natural part of the music, I think the BLO3 is still the winner. The beauty of these earphones is that at this sort of price, you can easily afford to have both in your collection. As you've already gathered, I'd skip past the BLO1 entirely, and I would personally have the BLO3 for that little bit of extra warmth, bit of space and layering, and I'd have the SSP for the little bit better focus and articulation of the sound and the resolution of those textures. It's a slightly less enjoyable listen, but it's definitely a very engaging and exciting listen thanks to that treble. So hopefully you found this review useful. Hopefully it's clarified some decision making, helped you either spend your money wisely or save some money. If it has, do think about hitting the subscribe button and the like button so I can share more of these reviews with you in the future. For now though, happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.